Welcome back to the program. We are joined today by Tara Reade, former assistant to Senator Joe Biden, also working with Leon Panetta and for the Democratic Party in the United States. And today we'll discuss how the American system is handling allegations against political elites, also, which is a key issue to preserve democracy and the rule of law. So, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I'm actually an RT contributor now and no longer in politics in America. And I am talking to you from Moscow, Russia.
Yeah, were you recently, while you were there, also under political asylum, but you now received your citizenship.
Yes, on September 22nd, it's my new birthday, Glenn.
Yeah.
So, President Putin, under presidential decree, signed my citizenship. So I'm very excited, and soon we'll be having my passport ceremony. So it's really an emotional, positive, exciting time for me. So very happy. And, I love working for RT. Margarita Simeon has been amazing to me, as has Maria Butina, who's with the State Duma. Very strong women and very helpful and compassionate. And we're able to coordinate the efforts to make sure I was safe to get political asylum and all that. So yeah, all good.
Yeah, I really want to discuss with you the issue of whistleblowers in the United States. Of course, we had many cases over the years, from Assange to Bradley Manning, Edward Snowden, but but you also had, well, before going into the media, you had a lot of experience working for the Democratic Party, that is, working in the political system. You follow the legislative process, the political communications which were done. But this is not only an area of expertise for you, because, well, unfortunately, you also became a case study on this topic. That is how governments deal with whistleblowers, because you accused Joe Biden of a sexual assault taking place in 1993. And again, you also then got some experience on how the political communication that followed, as well as the legislative process. I thought that a good place to start would be the U.S. government's actions against you, because when you put forth these allegations, you instead have the government work against you, which is
Mhm.
an interesting development. I was wondering if you could speak to this.
Absolutely. I mean, I think our audience has seen, the oppression and the way that Julian Assange, Edward Snowden, as many of the names you mentioned, whistleblowers coming forward and what happened to them. Mine was a unique personal case, but I also was speaking to the corruption as well. And I was due to testify before Congress on the whistleblowers panel about that, about the weaponization of the DOJ, with the Department of Justice, and FBI in the United States. And right before I did that, I had come to Moscow and then was informed that my life might be in immediate danger, or I might face prison as retaliation from the Biden regime. So it was best I stayed in Moscow and sought political asylum, which I did, and I received it. So to answer your question, really, when you have the arm of government that is supposed to be law enforcement actually going after whistleblowers, it really is telling about the amount of corruption in a government. And in my particular case, I was speaking, not only about my personal experience with Joe Biden, but also the fact that he, was making money. The Biden family was making money from the Ukraine, from this foreign adventure, from the Kiev regime, with the weapons manufacturing. There's basically money laundering. And many accounts are being coming forward about how the money was laundered, about 300 million minimum. It was probably much more that they were able to trace that went into the family's accounts. But, you know, to not be able to speak about it and to be attacked by the Western media, to be discredited, to be silenced and oppressed was very difficult, and then to be threatened with prison. So they were trying different levels, different ways to silence me, like they did Julian Assange, like they did Edward Snowden, to the point where, I chose to leave and stay away. And I'm safe now under the Trump administration. I feel like I could maybe go back, but I fell in love with Russia. And the more I stayed here, the more I just really saw, oh my gosh, I could have peace. I can work, do my creative work and do it in peace and not be oppressed and be silenced. And that was very important to me. So that was really contingent on my decision to stay. Um, Right now, I don't know what's happening with the DOJ and FBI. It's under new administrations. Kash Patel's the head of the FBI. As far as the CIA go, Tulsi Gabbard is the head of the CIA. Both had really good intentions to try to clean house and get rid of the politicized weaponization. But I don't know how successful they've been, Glenn. Julian Assange still doesn't have a pardon. Edward Snowden still doesn't have a pardon. I mean, Julian Assange is free and he lives in Australia, but I just mean his name cleared, to where he was going to the White House and able to do WikiLeaks. And Edward Snowden should receive a pardon and he has not. So, I'm just wondering, um, it's kind of tied into freedom of speech. And I think that freedom of speech is definitely under attack in the West.
Yeah, as a quick detour though on Joe Biden, because he actually granted a pardon to his son for any crimes he may have committed, and the time span was quite fascinating because it was from it was January 1st, 2014 to December 1st, 2024. This is
Mhm.
the since the toppling of the government in Ukraine. What's quite fascinating, if you hear from the former general prosecutor of Ukraine, Viktor Shokin, he's quite specific in how the US began to treat Ukraine as a colony immediately after Yanukovych had been toppled, and of course all the money interests which came through there. And of course Biden was a bit more reckless than others. He put his son on one of the larger gas companies in Ukraine. Only was, I'm not sure how long, was 2-3 months after the coup. I mean, it was very blatant the way he involved his own family in stripping, or not stripping Ukraine of its assets, but making money personally from the coup. Um, but yeah, I did want to ask you though about did did um, did they open a case against Biden? Because at least what you learned was they opened an investigation against you, but they didn't tell you what it was.
No. No, I have a sealed case against me where they impaneled a grand jury in California, Northern California. I have no idea what it is. It's sealed. No one can get access. Believe me, people have tried, including my attorney. And then of course there's the threat that they threatened me with sanctions and wire fraud and some other things, which would have been out of Virginia or whatever. But my lawyer filed a complaint against the FBI and DOJ, and that complaint is still active. And it's interesting you brought up Hunter Biden because we just amended it to include Hunter Biden and Jill Biden because during the time that you're talking about, towards the end of the administration, they were using an auto pen to sign some of the pardons. Um, so the question is, if Joe Biden wasn't cognitive, which is what the White House themselves was saying right at the end, if you recall, then he wasn't in the present state of mind to make those pardons, which could topple all those pardons, right? If they're questioned. One of those pardons was to his son. And if you recall the media, Joe Biden said directly he would never give a pardon to Hunter Biden. And then all of a sudden he did and never really addressed why, because he was at that point cognitively not really talking much to the media. So, what the Trump administration is doing now is they brought an investigation through the committee into um, what they call the auto pen and into who was running the White House right at the end, who was sending arms to Ukraine and money and trying to, because if Joe Biden wasn't cognitively able to fulfill those duties, who was doing it because they weren't duly elected. And the rumors are it was Anthony, it was Tony Blinken. Um, at one point, some of the White House staff, Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. And if that's true, that's illegal. And if it's also true, then Hunter does not have any kind of protection, um, and his pardon should be overturned. So interesting you brought that up.
Yeah, well, the legal system doesn't seem to work as it was intended, but you also went the way of suing, though, the DOJ, the Department of
Mhm.
Justice. Is this also has this gone anywhere, or?
Right now, the government shut down.
Yeah.
So nothing's happening in the US government until it reopens. It's sitting in the FBI. I don't know what our goal is. We've sued for an amount of money, but but beyond that, it's to get the files that the NSA, CIA, FBI have on me for illegal surveillance, get those files, purge them. Of course, I'll make them public first because I want people to know I'm just a regular citizen. And I came forward with a personal case, and then I have the DOJ and FBI surveillancing myself and my family. That's very unusual, and it's an expense for taxpayers. And I'm wondering how much. And then to go after me the way they did so aggressively, was really something. And I just don't want this to happen to someone else. But it is happening. Like the person that came forward about the Hunter Biden laptop, which still is under investigation, was verified as real. And as you recall, I believe it was 72 CIA agents signed off that this was a fake, right? That it was Russian disinformation. Turns out those officers lied. So since then, Tulsi Gabbard has released a lot of CIA files about the politicized CIA and has let go, I think, of 37 officers, if not more, that were acting in political interest rather than doing their due diligence for the American people.
Yeah, well, the reason I ask is because if you launch an allegation against, was then the president of the United States, and the response is to to put a legal case against you. Now, if there would, well, let's say, you were working for the Russians and there would be it would be evidence, then surely transparency would be good. But if this is just a way of trying to destroy someone's reputation to take them down as a retaliation for, I guess, daring to to put an allegation against Biden, it takes on a very different form. Now uh, yeah, it's a way of silencing any whistleblower. This is quite serious. So I guess my question is: has there been given any justification as to why there is no transparency? Because showing what's in those files should be quite important.
They're saying because of national security, they can't release certain parts of it. So, my attorney's been pushing for it. So, what that tells what my attorney explained to me in layperson's terms is basically they're saying that I'm cross referenced in other cases. So, if you recall, during that time, they were suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop from the media. They were suppressing my story and other ones in the media. And if they did do any media, it was like a hit piece on me or to negate the Hunter Biden laptop and that sort of thing. My name, Tara Reade, was called election interference in Facebook and Instagram. So social media was in on it too. And I think if your audience looks at some of the work of Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger, they can really get an overall view of how the Biden intelligence community was using social media and media to craft their message, so to speak, and to silence whistleblowers or anyone with an opposing political view. And then they use lawfare to simply go after and imprison people, which happened to several people, Republicans. Uh, you know, I am really shocked at how corrupt things were. I shouldn't have been shocked. I was watching it evolve, but it's still shocking when you're in it. And I feel like I really am lucky now being in Moscow, and working. And just so your audience understands, because I'm sure they have questions about me being in Russia. Um, when I was in America, I was getting so targeted that even my family was targeted, my pets. And I really had no resources to get security or to protect myself. And it was difficult to work. No one wanted to work with me. They were afraid that the Biden regime would come after them or do tax, investigations on them, find, all kinds of things so that I couldn't work. So I was able to write op-eds about geopolitics, which is my sphere. I have a law degree and I have a background with international and politics, as you mentioned earlier. And, our T offered to let me write op-eds, but I was very open about that, very public. I did a podcast and I said the podcast was done by me. It wasn't financed by anyone. And, I was very open that I was working for RT with these op-eds and they would have RT's logo on them. And, I've always been transparent about that. So that happened after I came forward about Joe Biden. So I wasn't working for the Russians way back. So I think in Reddit, I think I've heard some really funny theories. One journalist that continually goes after me, I won't say his name. He's a Western journalist, but he does hit pieces. He said I hallucinated my way to Valdai. And then in Reddit, they accused me of being a time traveler. So there's all kinds of elegant um, reasons why I'm here or known. So it's kind of funny when you look at it like that. But if that's the best they can do, uh, that's not really relevant. Uh, I think what's more important is that we really let people know that there's got to be a safe way they can come forward to talk about corruption, whether it's a personal case or professional case when it's someone powerful.
What's fascinating though is that whenever Trump refers to the 2020 election as rigged, it's treated as a conspiracy theory. But the Biden laptop incident on its own, that was very much interference into the election. That is, um, this laptop of Hunter Biden was leaked. It had a lot of compromising information on it, not just about him as a son of the president, but the president himself. And the response was to replay the RussiaGate idea. That is, well, it's just a disinformation operation by the Russians. And what was interesting there is how the government had the intelligence services and the media playing on its side. And again, this is not a conspiracy theory. This has been proven. That is, first, you had the 51 intelligence officers coming out saying that this is likely a Russian disinformation campaign, although they provided no evidence. Also, it was very unclear to me exactly where the Russians would come in between. When the laptop was handed into the repairman, it ended up with the FBI. It was never even explained. It didn't really make much sense. But nonetheless, once the intelligence agencies, which were then working with the Biden, it's very at least sympathetic with the Biden administration, had pushed this through, then of course the media could jump on as well, and you had mass censorship. Keep in mind, Twitter, they deleted. The the count of the New York Post. This is one of the oldest newspapers there is in the U.S.
Mhm.
But what we also learned, of course, I think it was a year ago or so, was Mark Zuckerberg. He came out, said that yes, we were pressured into censoring many things, which turned out to be real. We had to censor it anyways as disinformation with the Hunter Biden laptop coming up. But we also see now Google. They also said the same thing. They also came under pressure from the Biden administration. They also had to censor. I mean, this is quite quite extraordinary. And but I wanted to ask you though, based on your personal experience as well, how did not just the social media, but how did the traditional media as well deal with this case?
Well, it was interesting. The New York Times, Lisa Lehrer was the first reporter from the New York Times to do an in-depth piece. They did like 5 or 6 hit pieces on me, but they did like lengthy ones. They had people go to my drama teacher's house from high school, to my ex-boyfriend from high school. He called me up and said, "Hey, Tara, what's going?" So it was craziness. Like they were looking for something and I, Len, you know me, I'm kind of, I'm a policy wonk. I'm kind of a nerd in a way. I like to play chess. I like to ride horses, but I was never into drinking, never into drugs or anything exciting. So I have a very boring background. I have no criminal past, nothing. So they were trying to wrap something on me to discredit me. So one of the first things Lisa Lehrer said to me is she said that when they went to the Biden campaign to get a response about my allegation, what happened in 1993, and then I had filed a report with the US Senate, that the answer back from the Biden campaign was she's a Russian asset. Not a denial, just she's a Russian asset. And I was like, well, I have no connection to Russia. And at that time, of course, I was not working for RT. And I said, I don't know what this is. Um, but that's not a denial. So what's going on? Let's get the report that I filed with the US Senate. And that's what Matt Gaetz was trying to get, the congressman, much later, which no one's been able to get. And Biden has it sealed apparently in the University of Delaware. It's still in existence at all. So the New York Times basically just treated it like they were attacking me. And they just and so did the Washington Post. So I had all of those Politico did a hit piece on me. So all of them came into me at once, just kind of attacking me. And, they accused me of lying about my education, but I have a diploma. I went to law school. I have law school debt. My daughter was present at my graduation. You saw me walking across the stage getting my diploma. So they didn't have anywhere to go. So they just lied about me, and that was really shocking. I mean, I even in my naivete, Glenn, I really thought the New York Times told the truth or just omitted the truth, but like wouldn't outright lie, and they did. The other thing they did that was interesting was the morning that they released the big piece on me, they published my social security number, which was on my congressional badge. And your social security number for those people in Europe is your identification number. So it can allow you to open bank accounts, get mortgaged. So I had problems still to this day with people trying to use my social security number.
It's quite incredible.
Yeah.
Well,
So they were
but
really on the attack.
it's just that in a democracy, though, the process should always be more important than the outcome. And I guess the problem of any polarizing society is not only that one is more or less compelled to hate and vilify the opposition as illegitimate, but it's also that one has to make excuses for one's own side and cover it. So whenever you see, let's say, in a site you have some principles, like yeah, like standing up for women, all of these things. Once it has to be applied to your own side. Principles often die, and this is a key problem when things go polarized. And well, I guess your story is quite interesting there also because it was in the United States, it was the Democrats which you worked for as well,
Yeah.
who were embracing these slogans such as yeah, believe all women, Me Too. However, when your story came out, going against one of their own, Biden, the first instinct was then to smear and again
Mhm.
throw this label on. I mean, it's become a a very broad label. I notice whenever there's something that goes against a narrative, it's Kremlin talking point, uh,
Right.
Putin stooge, Russian agent. You can just say these things these days. It's quite a strong accusation, but you don't really need any to substantiate it anymore. You just throw things out.
No, you're right. It's become like a vernacular in our society where the vernacular of terms like that, people just know what they are and like, oh, okay. And then that person's dismissed. Dismissed. And it's so egregiously wrong. And it's also really racist against Russia. It's really awful because, this campaign, you were mentioning Biden, but that campaign actually started with Obama, the anti Russia. They were working up to the whole where we are now. And I had talked about it in 2019. This is before the military operation. I said if Biden becomes president, he will take us to a war with Russia, meaning that he would take America to war. Um, and he did. And they still are close to doing it. Unfortunately, now Europe has really joined in, NATO countries, to their, and I think it will be to their demise, economically, if not structurally. Um, and again, the attack isn't just one tiered. It's against Russia, but it's also against freedom of speech in the West. You're seeing like the detainment of George Galloway and his wife for anti-terrorism. George Galloway is not a terrorist. He's a he has a podcast and he's a politician, a very eloquent one at that. But he's definitely not a terrorist. And to put a anti-terrorism charge label on him, that was crazy by the UK. So yeah, I mean, I think all of this is leading to the bigger, broader issue of freedom of speech.
Yeah, no, that's another word you can throw out there, terrorist, and
Mhm.
suddenly all rule of law can be put aside. No, that they did this to George Galloway, but they've done this to many others though. People who,
Mhm.
well, especially on the Palestinian issue, if they take the wrong side, that
Right.
is to criticize Israel. Then any criticism can be seen as a support for terrorism, and suddenly, yeah, if you criticize genocide, you could be arrested when you enter Britain, which is what. Well, he wasn't arrested, but he was held. George Galloway, I think 7 hours or something.
Yeah.
It's under the Terror Act. I mean,
Yeah.
it's quite. I would like to know what terrorism he has been
And
involved in.
they took his electronics. They confiscated his
Yeah.
electronics. How terrifying is that? And, you know, I just it makes me very sad for the state of affairs in both the UK and the US and other countries like Germany and France that are doing this because it's very punitive and it's certainly not democratic. So, I don't see a bright future following that path.
I always get a bit more worried when I see it in the United States because the US has had more, with its constitutional, there seems to have more legal protections. So when the US goes the wrong way on this, I can't help but to feel that in Europe we're going to be even more exposed. But I think that's also why it's important with whistleblowers because the way you strengthen a society is to air out its mistakes, not allow the rot to begin to, well, fester within the political system, allowing, yeah, for any dissent to be silenced, given that this prevents, yeah, course correction and accountability. Um, but have you, in terms of how it's applied different though, have you seen the media frame your allegations? How do you compare that to other similar cases?
Well, first of all, I just want to compliment you. That was a very eloquent way to put that. And yeah, as far as my other cases that are similar to mine, you'll notice it was kind of just split by politics. I think Trump had some allegations against him that the people received money or whatever, or some sort of motivation compensation, if you will. And they were, you know, taken around to the major media, and given their little media tours and treated very carefully and believe all women and that's the hypocrisy of the elite Democrats. And I think that they're just becoming more and more tone deaf to what people really want. There was a recent study that more than 70% of the US population no longer trusts the mainstream media. And the reason is, because of not just because of cases like mine, which are very individual and specific, but because of COVID and because of these endless wars, because they find out they've been lied to over and over again, the American people. And not everyone is delving into geopolitics, but there's people are starting to wake up to the fact that, wait a second, 90% of what I'm seeing is basically propaganda for a pharmaceutical company or a military industrial, a manufacturing company like Raytheon, but it's not to help the American people. I don't know if Europeans are waking up in the same regard, but I know that the U.S. Are really turning more to social media, to independent content creators like yourself, to thinkers that are thinking outside the box. Um, but those people have their own challenges, like Tucker Carlson, yourself, because you get censored or taken down by YouTube, or you know what I mean, if you say the wrong thing.
Yeah, that happened already once. But
Yeah.
but but I was wondering how you saw the Trump presidency though, because again, one should be careful about how everything becomes politically polarized. I mean, I thought that he would try to put things a bit back into place, but he appears to be going the other direction now. That is, with Assange, we saw that the WikiLeaks revealed that the CIA was contemplating killing him. Hillary Clinton, we learned, that's a direct quote, had said, "Can't we just drone the guy?" I mean, he reveals American war crimes, and her suggestion is to use a drone to kill a journalist. But you saw the same with, but then Trump, he suggested that, I'm not sure if he said it directly, but at least some had suggested he might pardon Assange. But then you had Bradley Manning as well. He was jailed. Suggested that he might pardon him as well, and of course, he did maybe. Wait, when was he pardoned?
Julian Assange is now free in Australia, but I'm not
No,
sure if he received an
no, I meant
American
Manning.
passport.
I've
Oh, Manning is free. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but also Edward Snowden. There was some discussion or whether Trump would pardon him so he could go back to the United States.
No.
But instead, now we see Trump. He seems to be tightening the ability of whistleblowers to come out.
Mhm.
How do you see Trump's role in this whole thing? Because I guess it's not a new thing that he's not actually delivering on the platform he ran on. Uh, of
He's
course, not
not.
unique to him as a politician, but nonetheless.
I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I was really hopeful, as well, Glenn. I thought because he ran on stopping the endless wars, exposing the deep state, being a more transparent government. And I know a lot of really, large voices in the US were behind that. And, the Epstein files are nowhere to be seen and not coming out. And now Pam Bondi claims they were never on her desk. And now Kash Patel is saying, well, there's nothing there. I mean, come on. It's like we all know Epstein was a Mossad agent and something happened. This is my theory, and this is just my opinion. I could be completely wrong, but something happened when Trump went to London. I don't know what it is, but his position regarding Gaza, regarding um, the Kiev regime, everything changed when he came back, and even Epstein. Something completely changed with him. It was kind of gradual. And other people will say, hey, he was never going to do that. He was just trying to get votes. But I don't know. Something pivotal happened in London. And someday maybe we'll know what that was. But this is my theory. I think that unfortunately, there are certain um, monetary reasons why, because of like APEC, that's very active in the United States and brags about, you know, influencing foreign policy. And by the way, they're not a foreign agent. APAC is out of Israel. They've given a lot of money to congressmen. 90% of Congress actually have been funded by APAC. And they have an agenda, foreign relations agenda. I don't think that's just about the Middle East. I think there might even be a little bleed over into Kiev as well. I think that Donald Trump, for whatever reason, is bending a knee to these powers that be. He's listening right now to Kellogg, who's very, much a hawk, and to Lindsey Graham, who never saw a war he didn't like. And, and here we are, like on the verge of escalation with the tomahawks. And we heard, President Putin's response to Donald Trump saying he was going to give Tomahawk weapons to Ukraine. And the Ukrainians don't have the training or the knowledge or the wherewithal to run those weapons. So he made the point that he knows that American personnel would be involved. So that's an escalation to war. Now, Trump allegedly hasn't made a firm decision, but is leaning in that direction. I noticed that, and people have mentioned when we were at Valdai, several experts were talking about what's going on with him swinging back and forth. And I really think, Glenn, it's because the American government has been hijacked basically by foreign interests and by the military industrial complex. And unfortunately, there's a lot of Europeans that want to go to war. I don't know why. You have had on experts explaining what they think, and you've talked about it, but it seems like it's suicidal in a sense for Europe. Um, but that's neither here nor there. What it is for sure is an escalation to a war that could lead to nuclear holocausts and will affect humanity itself. So my hope is that Donald Trump will, see some reason, listen to the doves in his administration, because there are doves, but they just don't seem to have a voice right now.
Yeah, the weird thing is that towards the end of 2024, when Biden began to send ATACMS, I mean, Biden himself must have known what exactly this would risk. I mean, at one point he argued that F-16s would mean World War III, but the ATACMS, being U.S. being directly involved in then striking inside Russian territory, that I don't think people realize how close we got to a Russian retaliation, which could have then escalated to a nuclear war. So, for all of Trump's mistakes, and there are many, I also was quite relieved when he got elected, because this seemed like a certain path down to nuclear holocaust. And I thought, well, at least if he's willing to recognize the madness of this, which he did, he said, this is crazy, we shouldn't go down this path, then, all other, well, maybe not be forgiven, but at least it will pale in comparison to essentially ending the world. But now, what is it, 9 months
Again,
later?
it's
Yeah.
yeah. You have bureaucrats and military and industrial complex that is very much deeply embedded in the US infrastructure. And so it's hard for any head of state to actually, unless, they're already going down that path, it's hard for them to resist it, obviously. Uh, we'll see what Donald Trump does, but I know that President Putin has shown great patience and great restraint. And, you were there, you got to ask him a question which he answered thoroughly. He spoke for 4 hours, then took some questions from journalists. I don't know a Western politician that could do that, because he answered the questions with such detail. And then I asked a question, and that was a really big moment for me, to thank him too for the, protection of a political asylum and then citizenship. So my hope is that, you know, people like President Putin, who have this thought about nuclear war, which he said in the Oliver Stone interview, people can look it up. They asked him, President Putin, who would win if there was a nuclear war between the United States and Russia? And he said, no one. And my hope is that all world leaders have that same sentiment.
No, I agree. I think any war between the US and Russia, hoping which side will win, I think it ignores the most important part, that the war itself is the greatest threat. I mean, would destroy ourselves. It's hard to imagine there actually being any winners in such a war. But again, my fear is that Trump now, he seems obsessed with the idea that he can't be, that America's weaknesses or decline has been because it's too soft. It hasn't been able to be tough enough. The world doesn't respect it. Uh, so while
It's
so
yeah,
this,
it's so interesting because on the campaign trail, he acknowledged all these endless foreign wars have taken away money. Meanwhile, money is just pouring into Israel for their healthcare, for their military. What about the United States, the Americans that pay taxes? What about their healthcare, their infrastructure? It's same thing with Ukraine. Zelensky goes and pounds his fists on the House of the Congress, and you see U.S. politicians waving the Ukrainian flag. That's unheard of. In all the years I was in Washington, you never saw a flag waved in the chamber. It's just been recently they've been waving the Israeli flag and the Ukrainian flag. Um, and talking about saving democracy, one country is doing a genocide, and the other, Ukraine, the Kiev regime is Nazis and killing their own population, doing their own ethnic cleansing and outlawing the Russian language, now outlawing the church, the Orthodox Church, and the attack that's been on the Christian church there in Ukraine is really something. And you know, I think it was Foreign Minister Lavrov said 12, but in Israel, right? I mean, in Gaza, 12 times the amount of people have died in Gaza compared to Ukraine. And both of these conflicts are it's heartbreaking. And I think President Putin called Gaza the cemetery of children. I mean, it's because, 75 to 80% of the people killed in Gaza are women and children. Yeah, so we're in a very delicate time, and I don't know if Trump is really going to live up to the words that he used when he was running for president. It looks like you're right, Glenn. He's moved far away from that rhetoric.
Well, the great irony here, though, is that the people who now across the West who fear Trump call him, Orange Hitler, and he will, destroy the world, which is quite possibly he will. Um, that this is the time when you need people in his administration to perhaps come forward and tell about some of the madness. But again, they were cheerleading the criminalization of whistleblowers in the administration before, because they thought this Biden was great. So this is the
Mhm.
problem. Once you give a president this amount of power and ability to stifle whistleblowers, we kind of lost some key instruments to keep government accountable. So we might be paying the price for that now. Um,
Especially, yeah, the loss of transparency is the main thing that leads to what you just said, the criminalization of whistleblowers, right? So when you have a loss of transparency in government, then they have the ability to do whatever they want. You have a rogue state essentially, and that's dangerous. And it's actually weakens a democracy. It doesn't strengthen it.
yeah, that's always been the lessons with the whistleblowers, though, from all the way back to Daniel Ellisberg.
Mhm.
First initially they're treated as treasonous before undermining U.S. interests, but then, of course, once you take a step back, you realize that they actually revealed the crimes by their own government, lies by their own government, and
Mhm.
once that becomes criminal, you do have a severe problem. So, um, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Just, I'm hopeful that cooler heads will prevail. You and I both talked to so many interesting people from the global majority that don't get hurt a lot. And that was really interesting from, the global south, from Africa, from China. And, you know, I think what I took away and what I think Americans that are listening to this broadcast, especially and Europeans to hear, is that Russia's not the enemy. China's not the enemy. The enemy right now is within the European states, NATO, and the United States. And really people need to pay attention to their own governments and try to be as active as they can and whistleblowing is hard, but it's the only way to hold the powerful accountable at times. So yeah, but it was wonderful to see you at Valdi. I learned a lot. I know there was a lot of interesting discussions.
No, I very much agree. So, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me.